Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Book 3 Fire, Episode 16, The Southern Raiders. This one's animated by Moy Animation, which, again, another really interesting one that, like, such an important episode like this one is done by the secondary animation studio. Now, it makes a little bit more sense coming towards the end of the season when we know that JM Animation are probably, in the process of preparing for the finale, so it kind of explains why they're focusing on that stuff when Moy actually gets to do the kind of lead up to the finale stuff, which is just pretty interesting to think about. But yeah, this episode, if any of you have been following my channel for any time in like the last couple of years, you probably know that I consider this to be my favorite episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I suppose how I came to that choice was really that I think for a long time, basically since the series ended in 2008, more or less I think up until like a year or two into doing like YouTube videos and the podcast, I'd always considered like the last episode, Avatar Aang, to be my favorite. But then really thinking about it, I think doing stuff like my overall ordering my list of 61 episodes and doing, like top 5 favorite episode lists and so on, rewatching the series a lot more, this episode has stood out to me so much in the past couple of years as just being like this amazing representation for what this show does well, and that this episode is an example of a little bit of everything that the show does well contained in one episode. And that's why I consider it to be probably just my favorite overall episode, because like saying I think almost any finale that's multiple parts and choosing one part of it as your favorite episode, it always feels a little bit like, okay, you're choosing the big finale thing as your favorite episode, but the context kind of requires these all the other finale episodes because they're so linked. Whereas I think this episode stands out because it's kind of self-contained. It's just Zuko and Katara's field trip. A bit of other stuff happens in it as well, but it's just that, and then it references all this other stuff. It builds on like history between the characters. Like obviously Flashback with Katara, but also Katara and Zuko's history of like back in the book 2 finale. Great character moments throughout from obviously Katara, Zuko, but Aang as well. What they do with Aang at the start and end of the episode is so well done in this episode. Sokka even gets a strong moment somewhere in the middle. There's humorous moments towards the start as well. With obviously some of how Aang approaches the whole idea of, forgiveness. I forgave you for stealing Appa. And then the whole Sakasuki thing as well is just really fun how they approach doing it. But it's just, and of course then, action. It's got the kind of stealth, cool action of Zuko and Katara on their mission. And the various little bits and pieces that they do, whether it be attacking underwater with Appa, or Katara using bloodbending, all the way up to the Yon Ra stuff. But then at the start of the episode you have this really cool firebending battle and kind of escape from the temple at the start, which is almost a bit that I forget that's even in the episode, because I almost consider this episode to be so packed with other stuff I completely forget about that initial thing that forces them away from the Western Air Temple at the start. So I just think it's an all-round, I think it's probably as close to perfect of an episode as we kind of have in the series, of like an individual episode that is for the most part contained to itself, that just accomplishes so much. And I think that's the appreciation I've gained with the show in the last few years, of like not just only focusing on the finales, which themselves are excellent, but very much wanting to highlight individual episodes that are for the most part sort of self-contained, that also do just as well of a job. So it's why like I'd overall say like Beginnings I think is some of my favorite episodes of Avatar. Avatar and the Fire Lord would be right up there as well, and then this episode as well. So that's just a little bit of insight into some discussion there. But yeah, so much to talk about in this episode, starting off with, yes, of course, the Azula attack on the Western Air Temple, and immediately you see she is a lot less composed than she was before, like the last episode basically. And she is noticeably different here in that she just immediately arrives and just wants to eliminate Zuko. She says, I'm going to celebrate becoming an only child, as she attacks Zuko. And what we get here is basically the separation, the clear distinction of basically what Team Avatar is at this point in time versus who is not a member of Team Avatar. So you see Teo, Haru, Chitsang, Hakoda, those type of characters go off on their own to escape the temple, whereas it's, our main team, Aang, Sokka, Katara, Toph, Zuko, and Suki, who all leave on Appa. This is the moment where really they make the decision, the writers make the decision, Suki is a part of Team Avatar. And it's a decision in a way that the fans have latched onto a lot more than in a way the creators have, even though they were the ones who made the decision. Suki's always felt like the member of Team Avatar who they don't tend to focus on as a member of Team Avatar, and it's really frustrating when she's not included in some of the stuff that the rest of the group is included in. But hopefully that will be resolved as we get more comics and hopefully more focus on Suki in those comics. But it was great to see finally a decision made of Suki for once is not going to go away for a while. She's going to stick around with the group for a while. It's another obviously moment of Sokka and Katara having to say goodbye to their father. But as the series has kind of progressed, it's been the goodbyes have been for less and less amount of time. Of they get it, they lose him at the invasion, they get him back fairly soon afterwards. They lose him again, but come the end of the series, they get him back. So it's an interesting one there as well. But the action that happens here is great. It's primarily, of course, Zuko versus Azula. And I think meant to set up the idea of Azula has for the most part isolated herself from everyone. She's lost her main two friends and people who battle with her of Ty Lee and May. And now she's on her own. And I think that moment where they kind of clash, and they're fairly even, Zuko and Azula at this point, because Azula has lost that edge. Because of what happened, she's so, I think, in a way distracted by why couldn't I control them through fear? What happened? Why did they betray me? That Zuko, despite, I suppose, in a way, not being as skilled as Azula, suddenly is her equal in this moment. And you get the moment where the two of them basically blow each other off the airship. Zuko's saved by his new friends. And I think it's notable that at the start of the episode, Zuko saves Katara from rubble. And then it's actually Katara who actually catches Zuko when he falls and into Appa. So, returning the favor there, even though we still have a long way to go in this episode before that reunion actually happens. And they all watch on as Azula's falling out of the sky, and it doesn't seem like there's any hope for her. But, of course, using her own skill on her own, gets herself out of the situation, and Zuko's kind of of course she made it. She's perfect like that, isn't she? Showing that there's still a little bit of a gulf in class between them at this point, that she's still skilled enough to get out of that crazy situation. But it obviously leads from then into, Zuko's treated as a hero for what he did during this kind of attack by Azula, and the group is all behind him now. There's no doubts. The only one left in the group with doubts about Zuko is Katara now, and she's the one where she's not really clapping him as the hero. And Zuko wants to know why, and that he's felt like he's done everything possible to reunite, become part of the group, and Katara's the only real holdout left. And it's a really emotional scene as she kind of makes it clear that I was the first one to trust you, and you betrayed that trust back then. In a way, can you not understand why I'm so unwilling to believe you, even though you have been good for the last while? And I like that they make the connection here when Zuko goes to talk to Sokka, that it very much seems like Katara has basically applied her hatred for whoever killed her mother, and basically she's linked that to Zuko and his betrayal and why she hates Zuko, basically. And I like it. It shows Zuko and Sokka's relationship, that Sokka's okay with telling Zuko this, emotional story, and that we throughout the episode get the kind of fractured pieces of what happened on that day that their mother Kaya was killed. And I love how they time the flashback moments of you gradually get bits and pieces of the story, making it clear that Fire Nation raid, they're here for the waterbenders, but the tribe is pretty low in by itself because most of the main water tribe raids have already happened. So this is just another attack to round up the last few waterbenders, and by the end of the episode we find out that they're basically here for just one waterbender. We know it's Katara, but it adds this extra layer into Kaya's sacrifice, and I suppose in a way why Katara's waterbending and I suppose as well as that, her mother are just such an important aspect of her character overall. And as well as that, I suppose we had Katara basically shouting at Zuko, saying that the only thing you can do to make it up to me is to kind of bring my mother back. And it's definitely a harsh moment of her realizing that, like, no one can do that, but that's how she kind of feels at this point in time. That's the only way, given how she feels about Zuko, has kind of maybe misplaced some of the anger. That's the only way she feels that anyone could ever make it up to her. And obviously we get the clue of, like, the Southern Raiders, and Zuko kind of knows, he has an idea about who potentially did it. It had to have been the leader of the Southern Raiders. And he basically comes to Katara saying that, I know who killed your mother, and I can help you find him. And that's going to be their field trip to basically get revenge. And I think you immediately see the potential issue here. Like Aang immediately comes in, like Sokka comes in with later, you have the same doubts as those characters that, like, this, while I think needed to a degree for Katara, seems like their approach is a bit too aggressive in what they're trying to do here. It definitely comes across as being primarily for revenge, and that is not really like Katara. And Aang acknowledges that, I like that we see a kind of more angry Katara, that she sees this final opportunity to, you know, sort things out with the person who killed her mother, this incredibly impactful event in her life, and she wants to make this happen. And, she is, of course, a bit mean to, like, Aang when she says, you wouldn't understand, when Aang of all people understands what it is to lose people. And I think it perhaps speaks to the fact that even the show has been a little bit lax with how it's portrayed Aang and the loss of the air nomads, and that outside of really episode 3, and, like, I think the Guru referencing it, we haven't had a ton of reference to Aang and the loss of his people, the fact that he is 100 years out of time, and Bumi's the only person he really knows from his era. We haven't had references all that much to that, but I kind of liked it being brought up here, in that he's making it clear that, like, I've dealt with all of this loss. Everyone I knew from before is gone. I know what it means to lose someone like this. And in the end, like, they still go ahead with the mission, despite obviously all the drama in that, especially the one where, like, Katara says to Sokka, then you didn't love her like I did. And Sokka, like, I love the read from Jack the Senna here, with the whole, like, just the way he says, like, Katara, like, that just, like, he is shocked that she said it, he's hurt that she said it, but it's just kind of him saying her name, and it just has so much impact because it is this kind of, like, whoa, she went there, she shouldn't have said that. Especially, I think, her knowing what Sokka said to Toph in The Runaway, where she kind of knows in a way that, like, Sokka, like, for Sokka, in a way, Katara has kind of replaced some of his memories of, like, his mother's in his mind, that she just immediately took over, and in a way, Sokka doesn't remember his mother as much, and for her to kind of, in a way, say that is just so harsh. But in the end, like, the advice that Aang gives to Katara before she leaves is effectively, he gives her a bit of wisdom, and I like that Sokka notes that, like, that was really wise what you said, while Zuko's the whole time kind of trying to run down Aang, that, like, yeah, like, revenge is like a two-headed rat viper, while you're taking someone down, you're also taking yourself down, that you hurt yourself just as much as you hurt the other person when you take revenge, and basically telling her that if you kill the person who killed your mother, like, you are changing kind of fundamentally who you are, and I know that you're not that sort of person. And obviously they bring up the two ideas of just don't take revenge, and then should she or should she not forgive the person who killed her mother. And that's obviously, I think, the difference between characters that comes into play here. And what makes this episode so, like, so impactful in a way, that this is a Nickelodeon show, but they don't go the way you expect them to go with this, and that's what makes it so meaningful. So, I think the only, in any way, issue with this episode is that Katara and Zuko do a ton of traveling in this episode. we roughly know the locations of more or less where they went, and it seems like they were gone maybe a day or two. And considering the amount of time it took, like, book one for them just to get from one place to the other, them jumping around the world like they did in this amount of time is crazy, and it's just kind of inconsistent with some of the other stuff that they've done before. That's, I think, the only issue, and it's a kind of nitpick of just, travel time in the world compared to, like, you had a whole season based around traveling that it took there, but you cover more or less the same amount of ground in, like, a day here. But that's just a minor point. They immediately start investigating the Southern Raiders. You get a lot of interesting moments as I suppose, Katara begins to open up to Zuko a bit, so he kind of understands what they're doing a lot more. We get more parts of the flashback. We see a younger Sokka, a younger Katara. We see Kaya, we see Hakoda at this point. And then I think in one of these flashback moments, I think we also see Gilak. Now, it could just be a random Water Tribe guy behind Hakoda, but it was so interesting that it's like Hakoda and then Gilak's here, and then we're introduced in the comics to Gilak as like someone who fought alongside Hakoda. So I don't know. It's one of those ones where it probably isn't Gilak. The comic probably wasn't even designed with this character in mind, but it feels like one of those ones where like it's enough years ago compared to like his appearance in the comic and here that I think you could almost just say, let's just say that guy's Gilak, and he like changes slightly going from here to here. But I don't know if you guys noticed that in the background or not. But that was interesting, and it just sets up the drama of the moment. Like we're getting closer and closer to the actual confrontation. Katara saying there's a man in our house, calling her father, them going back, and he was gone, but their mother was gone too, and you see the clear impact that it has on Katara. The Zuko saying that like her mother was brave and her touching the necklace. You see the impact that it had, so it works so well. And then you get obviously Katara being very aggressive with her water bending when she's fighting here. You over the course of the episode see that the full moon is more or less out, and they get to the day when they seemingly confront the leader of the Southern Raiders, and Katara uses blood bending. And this is another huge moment in the episode because we know Katara doesn't like using bloodbending. She hated the fact that she had to use it to even save Aang and Sokka. That this tainted kind of art in a way that she knows it and is now using it willingly. It's one of those moments where it, I think, really shows her. And even Zuko reacted like, whoa, what's this that she's doing? Because Zuko doesn't know about bloodbending unless he was like behind the scenes told that this was something they encountered. This is like a huge moment of just Katara being willing to do this, and I think clearly it has an effect on her enough that it helps her with her decision that like she, I think, more or less made a rule for herself after episode 8 that she wouldn't use bloodbending, and here she's broken that. And it explains, of course, why going into like Korra, she is like front and center in terms of making sure that bloodbending is banned, and that like they really don't let people know about this because it's such a dangerous technique. But just big moment. Zuko ends up kind of getting the information that the previous leader of the Southern Raiders retired 4 years ago. His name is Yon Ra, and of course leads us to that moment. And I like how they, even in this episode, a lot's happening, but they take the time to actually introduce us to Yon Ra from his perspective. Like it's just, we suddenly cut to this character, it's him, and we get a little bit of a moment with him to understand who he is, and then get more when our characters actually interact with him. I like that it wasn't just our characters setting up the traps, we meet him, they do stuff to him, and then we get his character. I thought it was actually very well done to like lead with him and have the audience make their mind up about him first, that like, oh, he is this just like pathetic guy. Like he didn't retire this like leader of this amazing like raiding group. He's just a guy, and he's gardening, and he seems to have to like do everything for his mother, who just gives out to him the entire time. That he does not live on in any way kind of glory-filled life that he maybe did in the past. And it's such an interesting dynamic that he's just this guy, like retired guy, that there's he initially doesn't come across as someone who's killed anyone, but you see later on the elements of that come into play when they meet him. And you see, I suppose, just the fact that, like, he senses something behind him, and before even calling, just like fires back. And I suppose that's a sign of just the cruelty that he has, that he's willing to just hear someone behind him burn them before even asking about it. But of course, you get the moment where he realizes that it is Katara, and it's a great decision to have the moment of him in the present day realizing who it is happen at the same time as we finally see what happened inside the tent. That he sees Katara come in, orders her to leave, and in her leaving, that's when it went down. And we see what Kaya actually kind of argued with him about, that he's here for the last Southern Waterbender, and Kaya makes the deal: if I tell you who it is, will you go? And what happens is, she says that it's her. So her sacrifice, Kaya's sacrifice, is that she isn't just like saving her family and the tribe, she's saving like Southern Waterbending as well, and she's saving her daughter. So Katara, growing up knowing this to a degree, knows that, you know, her bending is kind of linked to her mother, because her mother sacrificed herself so that Katara, as the last waterbender, could live. And there's meaning behind it because Katara lost her mother, but also, you know, it's also the survival of this technique as well, and that's why Katara's waterbending means so much to her as well. So it's a strong moment for Kaya, even though it's her kind of like only moment that we really get to see, because it just shows that she was willing to make this sacrifice for the sake of her people, sacrificing one for basically everyone else. That the tribe still survives to this day because of Kaya's sacrifice. So that's a big moment. It's one of those ones where I'd like to see maybe some more flashbacks to see what Kaya was like. But you know, when are we going to get time to do that? Is it even important? I'm not sure, but it'd be something nice to get to kind of see more of her as a character. But yeah, so it obviously at this point we're at the moment where Katara has to make her decision. Is she going to take revenge and kill him or not? And it's done so well because what's really shown here is, I suppose, Katara's demonstration of power. That when he asked the question of like, wait, you know, she lied that she wasn't the last waterbender, then who was? And she just says, me, and just stops the rain, forms the rain that she stopped into like a bubble that keeps the rest of the rain out. And it's just this amazing kind of showcase of like, the person you let escape has turned into like the most powerful waterbender in the series, more or less. And he realizes the mistakes that he's made at this point in time, and knows that he kind of has no chance if he was to fight back, and makes the decision to just kind of give up and be like, okay, I know I did something wrong, take my mother instead. And it's just this shocking moment of like, to save his own skin, he's willing to just like sacrifice his mother to someone else. And immediately Katara sees that this is the level of person she's dealing with. Someone willing to sacrifice their own mother to get out of this mistake that they made, this mess that they made for themselves. And that, in a way, like, it's more punishment for this guy to just continue living as he is, knowing that she's now confronted him, rather than just taking him out of his misery here and just, you know, killing him. Seeing just how pathetic he is helps her to make her mind up. But also, I think in that moment where she's preparing that like icicle attack where she would have like murdered the guy, realizes that is not the sort of person she wants to become. Doing something as cruel as he did in the past and is willing to do again, that's not the type of person she wants to be. But I like, as she leaves and we cut back to the camp, she makes the distinction of like, yeah, I took your advice about not taking revenge, but I didn't take your advice about forgiving him. I didn't forgive him. I'll never forgive him because of what he did. And I really like that it's just this thing of like, I think any other Nickelodeon show probably would have had the what you learn as the audience by the end of the episode is that forgiveness is the right thing to do, as kind of Aang in a way set up at the start. But I like that they're willing to go of like, no, our character made the right choice here, but there are some things that in a way you can't just forgive, and it's the realistic approach to it, in that in this case, how could she realistically have forgave him for what he did? It really did have a huge impact on her life, and her life would be very different if her mother was still around. Like it's kind of the definition of something that can't be forgiven, in the same way that I think Aang, if he really kind of thought about it, probably wouldn't be able to ever forgive like Sozin for what he did to the air nomads or anything like that. That there are always good kind of those things. The idea of like, yeah, forgiveness in certain situations, a lot of situations, is good, but sometimes it's not. But I like that they still have a forgiveness scene, in that they transition from like, I wasn't willing to forgive him, but Zuko, I am willing to forgive you. They have the hug, and finally, like the most difficult person for Zuko to kind of finally become friends with in the group has finally forgiven him, and he's now fully a member of the group now, because and I like what they did with Zuko as well, in that I think they stood on the line of kind of having Zuko, you know, not move too far into the path of like, oh, I'm egging Katara on to kill someone, versus like, I'm trying to just help her. In that, this is where, like, I suppose the difference between Zuko and Aang came in that Aang wanted to take the much more forgiveness approach. Zuko kind of understood that she needed the confrontation here. She needed to see him, and that if she decided it, it would probably be justified if she did, you know, take him out. That Zuko was kind of willing to accept, you know, if Katara actually did, you know, killed him in the end. And I like that Zuko by the end acknowledges that, like, yeah, you were right, violence wasn't what Katara needed in the end. She just needed to see the person that he's become and let it go. Like Aang says, I think, earlier on in the episode, you know, like, let your anger out, then let it go. So that was good. But then, again, like, the episode just is, like, relentless. It's just, boom, forgiveness, boom, this, and then Zuko turns to Aang and is just like, okay, that was great the way you helped Katara there. It shows how wise you are, but at the same time, what are you going to do when you face my father? And it's like the simplest question ever that the show, I think, is presented as a cliffhanger. But it has so much meaning because, in a way, us as the audience perhaps haven't thought about the exact details of how Aang would fight and how he'd approach the battle with Ozai. And now it's directly been presented to him of like, when it comes down to it, what are you going to do? Like, you have to know that everyone expects you to kill Ozai. No one is thinking any other way. What was your plan? And all of a sudden now in Aang's head, that's all he can think about going into like the final few episodes, is that he now has this thing that completely opposes everything he believes in that Ozai is a character who Aang can't really forgive. But he doesn't want to kill him because it goes against his beliefs as an air nomad. But as the Avatar, he's expected to kill Ozai. And it's a great conflict to bring for Aang into the final episode. Of like, it kind of speaks to the fact that like he was ready at the invasion, but this episode shows that in a way he wasn't. Because what would have happened if he had got into a fight with Ozai then? Like, there was, what was he just going to try and capture him or what? Like, that's what this episode really presents, and it's so impactful because, as I said, like, there's just so much emotion, so much detail that's gone into in this episode, and it references so many things, and ending it like that to set up this finale theme of, is it okay for Aang to kill Ozai? Should he kill Ozai? Will he do it? Is a great question to ask going into the finale. But yeah, that's my favorite episode of Avatar. I felt like I in the review I did it justice in getting across the detail of how many important moments for characters that there are. And then as well as that, it's a notable episode. It's the episode where Zuko and Katara finally become friends. Katara uses bloodbending. She confronts Yan Ra. We get the flashback about Kaya. Aang is very wise in this episode, and that's a good characters thing. It sets up the finale. You've got action at the start, middle, and end. It's got a bit of everything, I think, that makes Avatar what it is. Plus, it's got the humor with the whole Suki stuff, with Sokka and Suki stuff, which I love that the what they kind of imply there of like what Sokka and Suki were going to do in that tent is just like, oh wow, Nickelodeon going there. I was just like, yeah, they were gonna hang out, sure. But that's just really fun little part of the episode. But yeah, that's been the review. Thanks for watching, and bye.